Starting us off with number 10 is The Hand. This one's from Stephen Wagner, who said his dad told him the story. So back in 1942 in Juarez, Mexico, his dad was around 20 years old and he went to a circus that was visiting town. His younger brother came along and they didn't really go to see the acts, they were more interested in the freak shows. Disappointed after seeing the performers, they were about to leave with two girls when they ran into a short, stubby man. The stranger introduced himself as the greatest illusionist in the world. That's quite a hefty title. When asked if he was part of the circus, the man said the owner turned him down because his act was so frightening. The owner said he was Satan himself. Once he had their attention, he invited them back to his trailer in order to show them the act. Once inside, the stranger put a glove on his right hand, started running his left hand over his right while wiggling his fingers. He then started chanting bizarre words, and when he took the glove off, everyone's jaws just dropped. The stranger's hand was completely skeletal. He turned it, let them see the back, it was completely real. His brother went to take a closer look and the man grabbed his head and said he was really about to show them something now, and at this point everybody shat themselves and made a run for it. The stranger came out onto his porch laughing, and on the floor nearby was a bed of long nails pointing up which he jumped onto. Weird flex, but okay. Blood started coming out of his feet, but he was still just laughing it off, and from that day onwards Stephen's father and brother knew they had met Satan.
Number 9. The Carpenter. The devil's weaved into history in so many different places. This ancient tale comes from a village called Tyrol in Austria. The legend has it that the locals had a well-traveled bridge that they used to cross from their village to a village called Schruns. One day, the bridge was destroyed in a massive flood. The villagers were very distressed, so they got help from a local carpenter. They told him that if he could rebuild the bridge in 3 days, they would pay him a huge amount of money. He knew such a task would be impossible, so he asked the villagers if he could have a day to think about it in order to come up with a solution. That night, when he was trying to find a way to build the bridge in such a short period of time, he was visited by a man with a little green hat. I love how these stories just have some creepy dude that shows up to your house in the middle of the night and you're like, I wonder what he wants, couldn't be anything bad. Well, the little man told the carpenter that he would build the bridge for him and he could keep all the money. The only thing he wanted in return was the soul from the first person to leave this house and cross the bridge. The carpenter knew this was the devil, so he had a plan. The next day, the bridge was built and the carpenter showed up. The devil saw him there and was jumping in excitement to get his prize. Then the carpenter pushed a goat onto the bridge and said, "Here's your soul. You got played, dude." Legend says the devil took the goat and people started roasting him as he was walking around with the goat. People were like, "Hey, you should have read the fine print. Oh, you two look like a great couple." I just love the idea of people roasting the devil. Like, oh, Prince of Darkness can't trick a tradesman. Number 8. George Lukins. Back in the day, if you got sick, you kind of had two options. You either got sicker and died, or you could go to a church and get an exorcism. On May 31st, 1788, George Lukins wasn't feeling too hot. He had started having convulsions and it was reported that he would yell in a voice that didn't sound human. So he went to the doctor, but after trying almost everything, the doctors couldn't cure him of whatever his ailment was. So he had plan B. He went to see Reverend Easterbrook to get his soul washed. The Reverend tried to help George, but it seemed that what was tormenting him was too strong for just him. So he brought in 6 other priests to perform a super exorcism. The 7 of them took their combined power to cleanse George. During the process, he changed through 7 different demonic personalities, one of which claimed to be the devil. After the super exorcism, George was cured. And probably didn't live past 35 because that's how life went back then. Number 7. The Codex GIGAS. Would you read a book that might have been written by the devil? I think that one's a hard pass for me. I'll stick to reading the back of cereal boxes. Well, the Codex GIGAS is said to have the devil's actual handwriting, and whoever reads it becomes cursed. Why would you read that? I don't know if I believe that the devil's handwriting is in the book, but I wouldn't want to be wrong just for some light reading. The story goes that back in 1523, Ludovico Spoletano wanted to make the best spaghetti ever, so he summoned the devil. Nah, I'm just kidding. He wanted to answer a series of questions he'd been asked. Exam season is very tough. It's documented that the devil possessed him, grabbed a pen, and started writing. Most of the text has never been decoded except for one sentence that says, "I think it smells like updog." Number 6. Through the Window. This one was written by Redditor Gayreka. It's a story his father told him about when his dad was growing up. He said that when his dad and uncle were younger, his uncle was a bit of a rebellious kid. Never listened, would stay up late, draw dicks on everything. His father told him that it was a big problem, that his uncle was constantly challenging authority and would get in fights with his parents all the time. Well, one night, the whole family heard a blood-curdling scream come from his uncle's room. The family rushed in there and his uncle was freaking out. He said there was a man standing outside his window. Their father went to check for someone but couldn't find anything. His uncle describes the man as wearing a long trench coat and having no face except for glowing red eyes. After this, his uncle was as sweet as pie, became a respectful member of society. So was this a devil encounter? Or was this a story a father told his son so he wouldn't act up? That's healthy parenting. Scare him psychologically, but he'll be a good kid. Number 5, Michael Scott.
No, God!
Not the hilarious character from The Office, Michael Scott was a Scottish mathematician born in 1175 and is considered one of the most brilliant men to come out of Scotland. He traveled through Europe and eventually ended up in Italy. While in Italy, his brilliance didn't go unnoticed. He gained the attention of Emperor Frederick II. Frederick brought Michael into his court as the head astrologer. But when you're a super smart guy back then, people get a little suspicious. It's said he could summon demons to do his bidding, and they would go all over the world to bring him delicacies. And that's just where his power started. There's myths of him defeating a coven of witches that he turned into stone. It's even said he changed the course of the river Steeds. But the most famous one is him summoning the devil to build a road to his castle. His father had just built a shiny new castle and it needed a road. I mean, you don't want to be the only castle in the neighborhood without a road. Like, what do people think? So he called the devil and many demons to build a road for him. He could have just hired contractors. He owed the devil his soul and foresaw that the devil would kill him by dropping a rock on his head. So he always wore a metal cap.
Clever girl.
But one day, he took off his metal cap when entering a church, and a rock fell on his head and killed him. They get you when you least expect. Number 4, John Dee. John Dee was born in 1527 on July 13th. He was an Elizabethan mathematician and astrologer, but he also liked to dabble in the occult. He was into some pretty freaky stuff. Even though he was researching black magic behind closed doors, he managed to work his way up as a man of intellect, becoming the royal astrologer for Queen Mary. However, his little secrets caught up with him and he was arrested for heresy in 1555. How do you get caught for something back then? The only way you would find out would be if you told people. Like, how was your weekend? Pretty good, you know, sacrificed a goat to the Dark Lord. Anyways, when he got out, he kept digging into the occult. In 1582, he claimed to contact the spirit world. People weren't a fan of this, so he had to move up north to the Manchester Collegiate Church. You can go visit his office to this day. There's the desk that he worked at with a giant burn mark in it. It's said that it's the devil's footprint. I would be pissed. I work all this time to summon the devil. He shows up and he puts his feet on my furniture. Number 3, Robert Johnson. Become one of the greatest musicians who ever lived and people are going to start rumors about you. Robert Johnson is one of the most talented and influential blues musicians who has ever walked the earth. And a big myth about him is that he sold his soul to the devil to become as great as he did. As the story goes, he was walking down a highway and came across a man that offered him the ability to play the blues like no one has ever done before, but it would cost him his soul. Robert was like, yeah, I'll do that. I mean, what is a soul really? It's like a concept or like whatever. Well, Robert went down in history for his amazing skills and died suspiciously at 27. Number 2, NICCOLO Paganini. Said to be the greatest violinist who ever lived. Seemed to be a common theme that back in the day, if you were great at something, they probably thought you sold your soul to the devil. No, it can be that you have like a natural gift and you work super hard, you just made a deal. Well, the same speculation goes for NICCOLO. He was an Italian violinist like none other. He was so gifted that he would surpass anyone who ever taught him. He was touring at 15 and probably got hit on a lot. Part of why people probably thought that he had sold his soul to the devil was that he looked so ghoulish. He was tall, skinny, had pale skin, long black hair. He was kind of like a hot Edward Scissorhands. People would even say that they could see the devil hold his violin while he played. I think they were just jealous. Number 1, George Whitefield. Now this one is my favorite for sure. George was a traveling evangelist. He wandered around trying to get people hyped on God. I mean, we've all seen these guys.
Do it, Jesus! A brand new hit! Bam, 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 bam!
In 1740, George was in Ipswich, Massachusetts. He was putting on a banger show. Like, people were going nuts. Apparently, the sermon was so hot and he was bashing the devil so hard that the devil showed up and was like, "You talking?" And George was like, "Yeah, I'm talking." And then he fought the devil. This is like an episode of Maury. George then summoned the holy power to push the devil out, and after that, the devil fell off a cliff and landed on one foot. He's got like a +10 on acrobatics. It's said that the devil's footprint is there to this day. The devil is probably at home like, dude, I don't even know you. Why are you talking so much smack?
Starting off at number 10 now, we have The Illusionist. This is said to be a true story from Juarez in Mexico of when the devil appeared to a man there. It happened in 1942 and was later told by his son before spreading around the world. On a summer's day, the man went down to see the circus in town with his father and his brother. The shows weren't very interesting that year, but they met two girls and went off to hear some live music. Suddenly, they were stopped by a short man in a dinner jacket. He claimed that he was the greatest illusionist in the world, but that the circus turned him down because his act was so terrifying. The owner had accused him of being the devil. This got the man and his brother's attention. The stranger said they could see the amazing trick at his home. They followed the stranger back and sat on a sofa in his trailer. The stranger extended his arm and began running his left hand over his gloved right hand, all while chanting a strange tongue. He asked if they were ready. They said yes. He pulled off the glove and everyone screamed. To their horror, the hand was now a skeleton hand, still wiggling its fingers. The man's brother got up to take a closer look. The stranger grabbed the top of his head with his bony hand and said he was now really going to show them something. At this point, they all ran and screamed. The man stopped and looked back. The stranger was standing on top of the steps and laughing at them. On the ground was a wooden plank with long nails pointing up. The stranger jumped off the step and landed right onto a nail. Blood poured out of his boot, but he continued to laugh. The man just stared at him, transfixed, until his brother grabbed him and they both ran away. They knew it was the devil, they felt it was the devil, and they say it was a day they can never forget.
Coming in at number 9 is Father Urbain Grandie. Now Father Urbain was a Roman Catholic priest that lived in the Loudun part of France. He was under major scrutiny and received a lot of criticism for ignoring his celibacy vow. If anything, he was known for having sexual relations with many women and as someone who had an elevated sense of lustful depravity. By 1632, he was accused of sending the demon Asmodai to enchant a group of Ursuline nuns into committing evil acts and becoming his sex slaves. You know, as priests do. After numerous nuns made accusations of seduction against him, he was arrested, then acquitted, and then re-arrested. During his second arrest, he was tortured by judges, after which they revealed a contract they found in his bedroom, which indicated he had signed a deal with Satan and many other demons. They saw it as evidence of him making a diabolical pact and convicted him of witchcraft and sentenced him to death. He was burnt at the stake. At number 8, we have A Better Life. This one's from Redditor CODEX_gaming, who said he had a really rough upbringing. His father abandoned his family and his mother was a heroin addict. He used to see her getting beat to a pulp, after which she'd take her frustrations out on him. CPS ended up taking him and his brother away, but a few years later his mum was clean and back with their dad and they regained custody. Sort of happy ending, kind of, but not really. They lived in a small house in central Texas, and according to the user, the house had a terrifying aura. Anytime he was home, he felt like he was being watched, especially in the bathroom, and he would have regular nightmares. And at this point in his life, his mum was working herself to death because their dad was a lazy slob who did nothing. She got so depressed she tried to take her own life, and desperate to help, the user started praying to God every single day. But nothing changed. He realized for something to change, perhaps he could call on the demonic entity that engulfed his house rather than God. He researched satanic rituals for ages and finally found the one he needed. While his family were out for ice cream one day, he got on his knees, wax coming down the candles he'd lit, and cut his hand and started drawing symbols on the ground in his blood. Obviously while crying the whole time, because who wouldn't cry after doing that? He recited the words and made the deal. And right after he did that, a cold breeze swept through the house and everything went black. But he was pretty much unfazed because he expected something like that to happen, so he went to bed that night and had the worst nightmare ever. He saw himself in the reflection of the mirror in the bathroom with corpse grey skin, bloody tears, and his eyes were crimson as well. There was a noose around his neck and his hair was bloody. During the dream he thought, this can't be me, and then the reflection started laughing, saying, "It is now, you made the deal." He woke up in the bathtub covered in scratches and scars, and it just kept happening and getting worse. 1 month later he started seeing things, hearing things, his nail beds began to recede and bleed, his canines became sharper, and his tongue used to get cut out of nowhere, and he started full on hallucinating and having visions of the past, of native people being slaughtered. And how did that even happen? I don't even know. And what did he get out of all of this? Other than his mum getting a higher paying job, not much at all. So moral of the story, know what you're getting into to before you ask the devil for help. Filling our number 7 slot is Joseph Smith. Now Joseph was a Mormon prophet in the early 1800s who claimed he encountered Satan before he saw Christ for the first time. We have both big shots in one story, how about that? The story goes that despite never doing this before, one day he just decided he was going to pray to God out loud. He went into the woods on a sunny day and knelt down and began to pray. I don't know why he went into the woods, he could have just done it in his house, but okay. But as soon as he did, he said he felt he was seized by a power that engulfed him entirely. He said it was so powerful he tried to speak but felt like his tongue was bound. A thick darkness surrounded him and he thought for sure he was going to die. And I mean, fair enough for being realistic. If I felt that, I'd probably think I was gonna die too. He was ready to sink into this despair that was around him, but in one final hope he used all his strength to call on God to get him out of Satan's hold. Then all of a sudden he saw a huge pillar of light over his head which came down on him. As the light rested on him, he saw 2 personages in the air above him and everything was fine again. At least this one had a happy ending, sort of. Now at number 6 is Madame LaLaurie. Delphine LaLaurie has been mentioned many times on this channel, but just a quick recap for you. She was a big Creole socialite in New Orleans. To the public, that is. Inside her house, she tortured and killed the majority of her slaves in a way you can't even imagine. In 1834, a house fire took over her mansion, and that's when she got exposed because authorities found bodies upon bodies of bound or mutilated slaves. One's stomach had been cut open and his intestines were wrapped around his neck. A bucket was also found with various organs from various slaves. A bucket. That's how much mass killing the woman was doing that she needed a bucket for all the organs she was harvesting. Anyway, with some stroke of luck, she managed to escape New Orleans and go to France, but many believe she didn't just escape due to luck. She invented a religion involving voodoo and black magic, and on top of that, people vehemently believe she made a pact with the devil in order to be able to still be wealthy, still be free, and escape whilst committing these horrendous acts. I mean, for me, it was either the devil pact or she paid a lot of important money to let her go. What do you guys think? Coming in at number 5 is the Satanic Cult. This one's from Brad, who said back in 2005, him and his friends spent one summer TPing a lot of houses. In the town they grew up, there were always rumors of a satanic cult that operated around a 10-minute drive away. So one day they decided to go check it out and TP it. Ballsy move, I have to say. The 5 friends went there the day before moon, which I guess is a part of every scary story you hear nowadays, and they bypassed the fence and ended up in a garden enclosure and heard an eerie high-pitched sound. Ignoring it, they continued to explore, found an old locked church, and found nothing else and decided to leave. Bit anticlimactic, but just stay with me. When they got to their car, their key, which was working perfectly 10 minutes prior, just stopped working. The car alarm started going off and then it magically just unlocked by itself. They piled in and drove off, and mid-drive the lights in the car just went off. The driver didn't press anything to cause it, it just happened. Panicked, they rushed home, and when Brad got to his front porch, he found 3 identical black cats. Keep in mind he lives a good 25 miles away from the cult, so how do these cats even get to his house? He took the cats as a bad omen and decided to take the cats a few miles out of town and leave them there, and the whole drive he was being followed by 2 black cars despite taking small dirt roads. Now I don't know if people were just messing with him here or the satanic cult was there and they saw him and everything was their doing, but either way, it's scary and it's creepy. At number 4 is Giuseppe Tartini. Now from the name, doesn't he just sound like a brilliant Italian musician of some kind? His name just has the ring to it, you know? Anyway, Tartini was an Italian composer and violinist during the Baroque period. He was very influential in Italy, but he was also known for his huge inferiority complex and uncontrollable temper. And I can just see that equaling to a lot of smashed violins. But anyway, the story goes that one day Tartini heard Francesco Veracini playing the violin better than him, and he was fuming and also dissatisfied with his own skills. The event made him spiral into depression for months, and in that time he worked in solitude and practiced the violin for 12 hours a day. During this period, it's said he had a dream in which the devil appeared and he met him. He appeared at the foot of his bed and played a sonata on the violin like he invented the damn activity. He offered him success in all his musical dreams in exchange for his soul. Did he accept? Well, it was was never really confirmed, but when he woke up the next day he wrote down as much of the sonata as he could, but no matter how many times he played it, it just wasn't as good as the Devil's version. If you want to check it out, the sonata in question is called the Devil's Trill Sonata, his most well-known piece, and it's quite hard to play even by today's standards. But the fact he could never play it as well as the Devil, I mean, doesn't that just indicate he wasn't successful in everything he wanted to be? So am I the only one identifying this major plot hole we have going on? Did he accept? Did he not? Let me know, Tartini. Filling our number 3 slot is Gemma Galgani. Gemma was an Italian mystic, later saint, in Italy during the late 19th century. She believed that the devil was waging a personal war against her. She said he loved giving her horrible headaches to the point she couldn't even pray. I mean, honestly, I just feel like that was a bad migraine, but moving on. She went on to say that once she was writing at her desk alone and the devil came and dragged her from the table by her hair with such force that her hair came out in clumps. In another attack, the devil took the form of a big black dog and put his paws on her shoulders, making her whole body ache all over. And in another one, she was drinking holy water and he twisted her arms so backwards that she fell to the ground in pain. If that's not bad enough, she said he even took on the form of people she trusted or knew, and once he even took the form of an angel. The worst incident though was when he started giving her blows to the head. She ran to her room but found him there with a rope. He kept trying to get her to give in to the wickedness and she kept resisting, and so he kept striking her with the rope as she was on the ground. He then threw her on the bed, then dragged her from it and violently smashed her head against the ground, and she passed out. Just imagine all this happening in your room and no one's there to help you. I'd be terrified. But I'm also curious as to what form the devil took when he attacked her all those times, and if anybody was around, were they seeing this happen? Was she being attacked by an invisible force? Like, what was happening here? Now at number 2 is Steve. This one's from Redditor Shabby Boa, whose real name is Steve and who used to be a trucker for 30 years. One night after a drop-off, he was on his way back home when he stopped at a diner to pee. It was completely empty, no customers, no staff, absolutely no one. He quickly peed, and when he came out, a grey-haired man was sitting at the bar. He told Steve he owned the diner and gave him food and a drink. When he got up to leave, the man said food is not what you truly desired tonight. Weirded out, Steve left and got into his truck. About an hour and a half later, he had to pee again. Steve, you've got a small bladder, mate, and saw another small diner which he stopped at. He went inside and again it was completely empty save a grey-haired man at the bar. It was the same man who said nice to have you back, Steve, as soon as he walked in. Steve got pissed at this point, thinking he was being screwed over by this guy, and demanded to know what the guy wanted. He said he was trying to help Steve. He started asking about Steve and how he used to have a family. Steve told him his wife and daughter died in a house fire years ago caused by faulty wiring. But the man questioned him, saying it wasn't just faulty wiring. The faulty wiring was a happy coincidence that just so happened to have happened the same time Steve left a lit cigarette in the house. Steve fought with him more, and in the end the man offered him a deal. He said he could bring back his wife and daughter in exchange for his soul after he died. Thinking it was complete bullshit, he agreed and left the diner. Before he did, he asked the man who he was, to which he responded, "I am the devil." That night he got home as if he never stopped anywhere at all, and when he entered the house, he heard his wife say, "Steve, is that you?" and the small footsteps of his daughter. He was so excited, but when they came down the stairs, their skin was charred black. Chunks of it were falling off, their clothes had fused and melted with their skin, and Steve could barely hold in his puke. And at that point he'd realized he'd made the biggest mistake ever, and that the next 30 years were literally gonna be hell. And finally, at number 1 is The Man. This one's from VR Greg, who said she met the devil for the first time when she was 8 years old. She was walking through a forest on her way home from school when she encountered a black-haired man in a shabby suit. Except one foot of his was a goat hoof and the other was a rooster claw. She could see them when she looked at him directly, but peripherally they looked completely normal. She took him for a walk and then he left. By the time she was a teenager, she assumed the counter was maybe a dream, or maybe that she just imagined the whole thing. But one day she was watching a news story about a man who got away with killing his wife, and as they showed the judge announcing the not guilty verdict, the murderer turned around and smiled at a man behind him who wasn't his lawyer. She recognized him right away. Black hair, shabby suit, hadn't aged a day. Her parents threw her a surprise 16th birthday to which nobody came to, which is just really sad. I'm sorry that happened to you. She ran home crying and she knew no one came because her classmate Erin had her party the same day just to spite her. That night she slept thinking about all the horrible ways Erin deserved to be punished, and the next day at the breakfast table her dad looked shaken. He told her that Erin had been found dead in the park. She met the devil the same day in her room and he told her she had wanted it to happen and he executed it for her. He offered her a deal, but thankfully the one piece of common sense that 90% of people possess is knowing that you should never make a deal with the devil, so she didn't. The girl didn't see him again until the funeral of her mother, where he told her the doctors lied to her about her mother dying peacefully, that it was agony and that no one was around to help her. She started immediately screaming and her dad ran over to her and made her sit down. When she asked him where the black-haired man was, he said, "You were standing alone, honey," and just started screaming out of nowhere. Shivers. That gave me shivers.
Number 10. Richard Cabell. This man lived in Devon, England during the 1600s and was apparently a huge dirtbag. He would torment people in his town and even abuse his wife. One night, in a violent rage, he struck his wife and she tried to escape. He then hunted her down and killed her and her dog. We all know what happens next. People believe that he felt he had the freedom to treat everyone horribly because he made a deal with the devil for immortality. But he did eventually die on July 5th, 1677. After he died, there were reports of a ghostly figure walking around the gravesite. This freaked out the locals so much, so they put a giant slab of stone on top of his grave, as well as encased the tomb with metal bars. And it was said that at night you could see a ghostly figure that kind of looked like a beast with glowing red eyes. Some people thought that it was Satan looking for the soul that belonged to him.
Next up at number 9 now we have Robert Johnson. He's one of the most legendary blues musicians of all time, whose music went on to influence other musicians for generations. Aside from his music, folks may tell you another story about Robert Johnson, that he met the devil. They say that one day Robert was walking down the highway on a cool October night when he came to a crossroads. A tall man was sitting there on a log by the side of the road. He said that he knew Robert and asked him if he wanted to play the guitar like nobody had ever played it before, to be the king of the Delta blues. He said yes, he wanted that. The devil warned him though that although his music will enchant the crowds, his soul will now belong to him. This is not just any crossroads, the devil said. I put this X here for a reason and I've been waiting on you. Then the devil possessed him. Robert's eyes rolled upwards in their sockets. The moon pierced his eyes. Then he looked at the man straight in the eyes and said, "Step back, devil man. I'm going to Rosedale. I am the blues." Now whether or not you believe that story, Robert Johnson was an incredible blues musician. I was actually listening to him as I wrote this script, and he also died under mysterious circumstances involving some sort of poison when he was 27 years old, which historians are still trying to fully understand. Moving on to number 8 now, we have St. Dunstan. He was a 10th century hermit who lived in Glastonbury in England. One day a mysterious stranger approached him and asked that St. Dunstan use his skill in smithing to make a chalice for him, a sort of holy cup if you like. Dunstan agreed and set to work. As he worked away though, he saw the stranger change form from man to woman, from woman into a child, flowing from one to the next. Dunstan realized that this was the devil, but he tried to act as if he hadn't noticed. Then, when the chance presented itself, he grabbed a pair of red hot tongs from the fire and pierced them into the stranger's nostrils, causing the devil to cry out in pain and flee. A while later, the devil returned, this time as a vagrant street performer playing the harp. Dunstan grabbed him by the leg this time and began shoeing him. Then he nailed a horseshoe to his cloven foot. The devil screamed in agony and agreed to be released on the condition that he never approach a house with a horseshoe hanging over the doorway ever again. This gave birth to the legend that horseshoes are lucky and even keep the devil at bay. Moving on to number 7 now, we have the devil's violinist. That's the name given to NICCOLO Paganini. Some even say he was the greatest violin player who ever lived. He was a child prodigy in Genoa, Italy, who struggled to find a teacher that he couldn't surpass immediately. By the age of 15, he was touring solo. Within a year, he had a breakdown and succumbed to alcoholism. He didn't reappear in the public eye until the age of 22, but this time he was somehow better than ever. They say he was able to play 3 octaves across 4 strings and a handspan. Now, you don't actually have to know what that means, but it's thought to be nearly impossible, even by today's standards. He was a striking sight in his performances. Very tall and very thin, with hollow cheeks, very long fingers, pale skin, and flaming eyes with thin lips that held a sardonic smile. To top it all off, he wore all black for his performances. Soon, rumours began to circulate that his violin was the devil's instrument, that Paganini had actually made a deal with the devil. Some say they saw the devil help Paganini play. Others say that they once saw lightning bolts hit the end of his bow during a performance. When he died, he turned down his last rites from a priest. The official account is that he did this because he thought he wasn't going to die, but others say it was because he feared the blessing of a priest. Coming in at number 6 now, we have The Richest. This is the story of Jonathan Moulton. He was an American general who helped the US win the Revolutionary War. He's also known for trying to trick the devil, apparently. Despite being very rich, Moulton wanted more. One night, sitting in front of his fireplace, Moulton said out loud that he'd sell his own soul to the devil to be the richest man in the province. Not one to miss out on the offer of a soul, the devil appeared right there and said that he would make the deal and fill Moulton's boots with gold coins every single month. For a while, Moulton enjoyed finding the gold in his boots every month, but soon he wanted more, and he hatched a cunning plan. He cut the bottom of his boots off and put them on top of the chimney. The devil filled up the boots, but eventually noticed the shoes never filled. Coins were just tumbling down the chimney where Moulton was practically swimming in them. As revenge, the devil took back all the gold he'd ever given Moulton. He burned down the house and kept his soul in hell for eternity. Legend says that years after his death, Moulton's grave was opened, and instead of a skeleton, they found a coffin filled with gold. Next up at number 5 now, we have Saint Pio. Talked about Saint Duncan earlier, but he wasn't the only saint on this list who claims to have had a run-in with a devil. Pio was also known for his frequent and often violent battles with the devil. On one occasion, a local friar found him lying bloodied and bruised in his room. When Pio came around, he said that he had been attacked by either Satan or one of his demons, which had left him with 3 broken ribs. On one night in 1906, Pio heard footsteps coming from the next room, which he thought was his friend, Friar Anastasio. He went to the window and tried to call out to invite him in for a chat. He found that his voice had gone though, out of nowhere. He just couldn't speak. Then he noticed a large black hound sitting menacingly on a nearby window ledge. In his account of what happened next, Pio said, "I saw the big dog enter through the window and there was smoke coming from its mouth. I fell on the bed and I heard a voice from the dog that said, 'Him it is him.' While I was still on the bed, the animal jumped up to the ledge of the window, then to the roof and disappeared." His colleagues believed that the devil was targeting him because of all the exorcisms that Pio had performed over the years. They said that on many occasions, before leaving the body of a possessed man, they would actually hear the devil shout, "Padre Pio, you give us more trouble than Saint Michael. Do not steal the bodies from us and we will not bother you." Next up at number 4 now, we have Johann Georg Faust. A 1507 book titled Historia and Tale of Dr. Johannes Faustus tells the story of Johannes Faustus, who allegedly met the devil. According to the book, he was a German scholar who, quote, "loved what ought not to be loved." It says that he craved nothing more than forbidden knowledge. One day, Johannes traveled to a crossroads in a forest and summoned the devil. He stood inside a protective circle and performed an ancient and unholy ritual. Soon, lightning came crashing down and the entire forest was destroyed. Demons emerged in 3 forms. First, a dragon, then as a man made of fire, and then as an old monk. After hours of conversation, Faust agreed to trade his soul so that his every question would be answered for 24 years. He told himself that things would be fine because, in his words, the devil might not be so black as they used to paint him, nor hell so hot as the people say. Well, the story ends by saying, that he was wrong and people were right. It claims that when Johannes died, his soul went straight to hell, where he spent an eternity of torture, wishing for death, but finding that even death had forsaken him. Moving on to number 3 now, we have the signed pact. Father Urbain Grandier was a French Catholic priest who, in 1632, was accused by a local group of nuns that he had bewitched them and sent demons to commit evil and impudent acts with them. Investigations into Urbain reached a new level with the discovery of what people claimed was a physical contract written on paper between Urbain and the devil. The contract was said to be even signed by Urbain, the devil, and a number of different demons. It read, "We, the influential Lucifer, the young Satan, Beelzebub, Leviathan, Elimi, and Astaroth, together with the others, have today accepted the covenant pact of Urbain Grandier, who is ours. And him do we promise the love of women, the flower of virgins, the respect of monarchs, honors, lusts, and powers." That's where it ended. Well, whatever you guys think about all of that, the local court found him guilty and sent him to burn at the stake. Moving on now to number 2, we have Saint Gemma Galgan. In her diaries, she wrote that she believed the devil himself was waging a personal war against her. In one famous passage, she wrote, "The demon came before me as a giant of great height, and kept saying to me, 'For thee there is no more hope of salvation. Thou art in my hands.' I replied that God is merciful, and therefore I fear nothing. Then, giving me a hard blow on the head in a rage, he said, 'Cursed be you,' and then he disappeared. I then went into my room to rest, and there I found him. He began again to strike me with a knotted rope, and wanted me to listen to him while he suggested wickedness. I said no, and he struck me even harder, knocking my head violently against the ground. At a certain point, it came to my mind to invoke Jesus, Father, eternal Father, through the most precious blood of Jesus, free me. I then don't quite know what happened next. That contemptible beast dragged me from my bed and threw me, hitting my head against the floor with such force that it pains me still. I became senseless and remained lying there until I came to myself a long time afterwards. Jesus be thanked." That was just one entry, and it was very intense. From the look of her diary, it wasn't her first encounter, and it certainly wasn't her last. And finally, number 1 now, we have Pope Sylvester II. If you had to pick one person who isn't in league with the devil, you may pick the Pope. But back in the 10th century, people thought the first French Pope was a master of the dark arts and had sold his soul to the devil. He was undoubtedly a genius. He was known for his work in mechanics, mathematics, astronomy, clocks, organs, introducing Arabic numerals to Western Europe, as well as natural science, music, philosophy, and theology. That was a lot for one person, especially back then. After he died, rumours began to circulate that Sylvester had made a deal with the devil, that the devil had given to him his intelligence and wisdom in return for his soul. This was a terrifying prospect for Catholics at the time, the thought that their own leader, God's representative on earth, had been meeting and dealing with the devil in secret. In recent years, experts agree that he likely got his skills and knowledge from regular meetings with scholars from all over the known world, and not from some dark dealing.